The early life of Rae Bourbon is largely a mystery, as she gave varying accounts of her origins over the years. Rae was born sometime between 1892 and 1902, and most often claimed that her birth name was Hal Waddell, though she used other birth names throughout the years as well. Rae identified as female later in her life, but identified as male most of her life. Born biologically male, Rae spent much of her life on the stage and pursuing stardom. After spending time overseas in London, Rae returned to the United States, married and fathered a child at some point, and then began doing stage acts in vaudeville performances, using various names like Ramon Icarez and Rae, sometimes spelled R-A-Y and sometimes spelled R-A-E, Bourbon. She claimed to have appeared in silent films. She wrote the book Hookers, a fictional account of a prostitute, under the pen name Richard F. Mann, and Rae worked as a model for women's dresses in department stores. After receiving a very large inheritance from her father, Rae began to get attention as a female impersonator in various shows, most notably the show Scotch and Bourbon. She traveled the vaudeville circuit until it ran dry, and then started doing drag routines and what they called pansy shows, a mix of comedy and lip-syncing, alongside other female impersonators, with gregarious names, including George Honeyboy Hayes and Billy the male Jean Harlow Barrel. Bourbon spent decades traveling the country performing songs and routines, some which were specially crafted for her, like Mr. Wong has got the biggest tong in China, and calling her shows things like Don't Call Me Madam and Boys Will Be Girls. Bourbon had a sold-out show at Carnegie Hall once, and she worked with Mae West in various stage productions over the years. Bourbon was frequently arrested for profanity on the stage, when she admitted to being attracted to men as a man, and she was arrested several times for dressing as a woman. In the 1950s, Bourbon claimed to have had full gender reassignment surgery in Mexico, and she used female pronouns much of the time after, and strictly used the R-A-E spelling of her name. Many believe that Bourbon was not actually transgender and that she did not actually have a sex change operation, but I tend to go with her definition of her life as a female at that point. When she was arrested once for dressing as a woman after the surgery, she would argue that she was indeed a woman, and thus shouldn't be arrested. She capitalized on her operation, releasing stories about it on an album and performing several shows about the experience. Bourbon was excessively flamboyant, and often drove between shows with a trailer behind her vehicle that carried up to 70 pet dogs. Once she had car trouble and had to leave her dogs in a Texas kennel. When the owner of the kennel, A.D. Blount, disposed of the dogs, likely to a science facility because Bourbon could not pay for their care, Bourbon hired 2 men to beat Blount up, and he died as a result of his injuries. Bourbon was arrested, tried, and sentenced to life in prison for murder. She died while in jail in the early 1970s, likely from cancer, and was appealing her conviction at the time of her death.